Welcome to Capes, Cows and Masks, the show where we uncover the world of soups and science fiction. And welcome to our weekly review show of the latest entry into the Marvel Cinematic Universe, WandaVision. Today we'll be looking at the 6th episode of the show, titled All New Halloween Spooktacular. This is directed by series director Matt Shakman and written by Peter Cameron and Chuck Hayward. Hayward, I'm watching you. I'm your host, Jake Hart. I'm a podcaster, writer for Fresh Take Hub, and sound designer. And as always, I'm joined by my fellow co-host.
Hello, I'm David Oscar. I am also a fellow writer, podcaster, and lover of all things nerdy.
Speaking of nerdy things, we've got a very big nerdy episode to talk about with references to comics and all sorts of other things. But Dave, after a spectacular episode last week, it still remains my favorite episode, I think. This one was still another good episode, but it was kind of different, I thought. But what were your overall thoughts of this episode? I mean,
I think because it is sort of like mid-season now, it makes a lot more sense that it just feels like another chapter in the story. It feels like this is the middle act of, the big story of, if you're watching the film, it's like you've taken like the conflict and the drama and the action from like the middle, and then that's become an episode. So I think while the beginning of the series, as you're setting things up and explaining things, then they can work a lot more as standalone episodes because you'll have characters be introduced and become a part of different stories, and they'll each take on certain themes. Whereas like now, it's hard to do that because everything is starting to unravel and kick off, which is really great for the episode. So I think it's a really exciting and really different kind of episode because you're sort of watching it on the edge of your seat, waiting for something to happen. And also just, you're so curious with so many questions as to who is this? What is happening? Why is this happening? And certain bits of dialogue are starting to tell us little clues as to what is happening and the situation. And especially because the sword stuff is happening pretty much as we leave it off in the previous episodes. So while there seems to be a difference in time in Wanda's hex, which seems to be day to day, there's more of a difference in terms of like, it's just, as we saw in this episode, they pretty much just pick up immediately after Wanda has a go at Hayward. So I think that that's interesting as well, that it is just literally picking up right where we left off. So it feels like it does feel like you're just picking up on like a part of a film in that way. Like when you're just like, oh, I'll watch the rest of that film tomorrow or something like that. It feels a bit like that. So there is a bit of a big divide in the sword stuff and the hex stuff. But of course, like I said, by now we have got a bit more used to the different styles and everything of the show. So yeah, I loved the chaoticness of the end of this episode. I loved a lot of the performances and the themes as usual. So yeah, another strong, really edge of your seat sort of episode, but didn't quite just have the like individuality or rounded story that I think a lot of other ones had, because they literally do just end it like mid-sequence pretty much. Whereas other ones have ended with like a cliffhanger, but it's kind of been like a closed sort of ending. It's still rounded off that story.
Yeah, no, I'm pretty much with you. I thought like the past 2 episodes especially, that they've had huge narrative reveals. Episode 4, we got all the truth behind Westview and, Sword, and we learned more events about the blip and stuff like that. Episode 5, last one, we saw Vision realizing what's going on. And then obviously the reveal at the end with Evan Peters coming in as Pietro. So I feel as if for this one, for some viewers, it might feel that it doesn't hold exactly the same impact, or that like one defining moment that had everyone going crazy, apart from the end maybe, but we'll get into that. But I think this episode really showcases the power of this show, the emotional story at its heart. And I think the reason why this show has been working so far is because it's not because of the cameos, not because of the Easter eggs, but it's because it's this exploration of grief, loss, and how much it can fuck you up if you leave it undealt with. You know what I mean? So I think what I really liked about the episode is peeling the layers behind the characters of Wanda, Vision, and of course Pietro. Peter? What are we calling him? I don't know. But yeah, I mean, I thought the acting again is just stellar. Like, Olsen just needs to get an Oscar already. Like, sorry, an Emmy, because she's just knocking it out the park. And, Evan Peters, at the beginning of the episode, I thought, oh, is this going to get a bit stale, this sort of role he's playing? But no, as we get through the episode, I was just like, whoa, like, he's really killing it here with, like, some of the pieces of dialogue that he's coming out with and stuff like that. So, yeah, overall, it's another great episode. Like you said, it wasn't the whole clear picture for me in terms of individuality and go, oh, this is such a great episode. It was a good episode. There was just a couple of others that I felt, connected to me more. So let's get into the actual episode itself. I want to get this out the way because I think this is the biggest criticism I have of this episode. And that is the choice to what it seems like to me anyway, to skip the 90s in terms of the sitcom stuff. Now, Dave, we've been on the show aching for, we can't wait for the 90s episode because, the 90s in a way is our era of TV, of sitcom, Saved by the Bell, yeah. Friends, Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, all these amazing shows that we grew up with. But it seems like they were like, nah, we're just going to skip the 90s and go straight to the early noughties. Obviously, this show pulls heavily from Malcolm in the Middle. The intro, the way it's shot, the monologues that the characters have, like speaking to the camera, breaking the fourth wall, and the soundtrack as well. I thought the soundtrack had very similar beats and all the way the characters were acting. But the Malcolm in the Middle was from the years 2000 to 2006. So I don't know. What did you think of the decision to basically skip the 90s and go into the early noughties?
Well, I had so much anticipation, like pressing play on this episode because I was like, this is it. If this is the 90s, and I've been saying on this podcast for several weeks now, I was like, they got to do that turn to camera kind of intro. And I was like, I was setting myself up for disappointment in a way because I was like, you know what? Knowing life, I probably won't get what I want because I've looked forward to it so much as well. So as soon as it started, I was like, yeah, of course, I'm not surprised. I wasn't surprised by the different take and the sort, way it was showing, obviously the rock music and everything, which is a part of Malcolm in the Middle. I was like, okay, this kind of makes sense. That is like a 90s aspect of the 90s, that whole like teenage dirtbag stuff. But like you said afterwards, I was like, well, yeah, that's 2000 to 2006. So I think that we need to remember originally, I think there was going to be 10 episodes, and they said because of the pandemic and everything, I think it got shortened down to 9. So when they first announced this show, I think it was like, oh yeah, it'll be this 10 episode series. And I think it did get shortened at one point, like ages ago. So not necessarily maybe in terms of they made it and everything like that, but before, as they were producing it and making it. So maybe the 90s did just unfortunately get lost to the pandemic or whatever, we want to boil it down to, but it does feel like that. The fact that you do go like, oh yeah, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 2000s, because there are several other references in this episode which show that that's the era. But also in my mind, I was like, oh, well, maybe they're just going on the basis of so many of these sitcoms cross eras. So I wasn't sure with Family Ties from last week, maybe that did dip into the 90s. I was like, nope, that was just pure 80s. That was 82 to 89, I think. So they can't even make that argument. I think there is an argument to be made that, yeah, there might have been a lot of similarities, and you saw that a bit with the 70s to 80s as well, is maybe they felt that the 90s is kind of going to still be the same thing that we've seen for the past 2 weeks. So I do respect it in the sense that it was something then completely different, because as we've seen before, the 50s and 60s were quite similar, the 70s and 80s were quite similar, and probably now the noughties and the 2010s will be quite similar. But probably the 90s would have been that more difficult one, which might have just seemed like more of the same thing. But again, it's just unfortunate that you don't get that clear decade by decade aspect. And like you said, that we don't get references to some of the stuff that we grew up with and some of the stuff we love. I still did get some aspects of what I wanted. You do in some ways, because again, Malcolm in the Middle's opening doesn't have any of the cast. It's just random shots of B movies and stuff like that. So they still show characters looking at the screen and like making poses. So I got slightly what I wanted. I'm clutching at straws a bit here, but there was an element of it, so I'll give them that. But yeah, it's I think it seems to come down to the fact that maybe they've dropped that one from maybe shortening the series or looking at it and just tightening things up. And yeah, it's a bit unfortunate, but maybe it was for the best.
Yeah, I'd like to know exactly. I mean, I don't think we'll ever get the story, but I'd like to know exactly what the thought process was in like structuring this, because did they maybe shoot it and then in the edit they were like you said, it's too repetitive, it's too samey, let's take it out?
Yeah. Or
was it down to the pandemic? I don't know. It could be a thousand things why they decided to not go with the 90s. I'm not salty. I'm just a bit upset that, you know, a lot of people got to see their childhood with these sitcoms, and I just feel a bit upset that I didn't get to see that. You know, it's a selfish thing, I know, but it just would have been nice to be referencing all the shows that I grew up with. You know, it's a shame, but it is what it is. It doesn't really take away from the impact of this episode, I'll say, or the story they're telling. So.
You are incorrigible, darling. I know you have a secret thing for Mexican wrestlers.
Me gusta mucho.
Chili con carne.
Oh, cool.
What do you say, boys? Who's ready for that first hit of high fructose corn syrup?
Let's get into the story then. So we open the episode with, it's Halloween! And we've got these, you know, your typical holiday special episode that we get in sitcoms. The family is preparing for the big night. And if you're keeping count, Billy and Tommy are still around 10 years old, I think. Doesn't look like they've aged since the last episode. And then we have the recently arrived Uncle Pietro crashing on the couch. And I thought from the shot where we see Pietro's like face all zoomed up and then the kids in the background, I was like, oh, that is such a Malcolm in the Middle like use of the camera. So yeah, I thought it was really cool. And yeah, it all seems back to normal in a way, you know, that the sitcom aspect of it all. Although at least that's what Vision wants Wanda to think in this scene. So he's sort of playing the game here. So it's really cool, this scene, and we get, you know, the outfits that we've all been waiting for. Olsen does her little dance, which is amazing. I love the excuse that Wanda gives for her outfit. It's like, oh, it's a Sokovian fortune teller.
Yeah, I thought that was really clever, because I was like, how are you going to explain that? But it does also make me think, well, what's Billy meant to be? But yeah, I just love the face she does there as well. It's so classic. Because I think with Paul Bettany, because he's more the secondary character, I think that because he's then a lot more reactionary, it gives him the ability to reference and play the stereotypical characters a lot more, whereas it's harder for Wanda to do that, because obviously, say Malcolm in the Middle, for example, she's not going to play like an angry mother in this, you know, and who's then pretty much the villain of the piece kind of thing. So in Malcolm in the Middle, the mother is often like causes problems and the conflict for Malcolm, etc. So they can't do that. So that's why throughout the 50s to now the noughties, she often plays a similar kind of role or plays it in a similar kind of way. But like you said, I still think that she deserves all the praise she does, because she does everyone spectacularly. And I think she does it in a very subtle and nuanced way as well, which I think is good. But it just means that she can't be like, I'm fully referencing this character because she's the main character. Whereas I think the Paul Bettany is able to do that because he's not the orchestrator of this, for one. So I felt that here he was really channeling Bryan Cranston. Like he was so much like that moment where he's just like, what's he say? He was just like, great parenting or something, you know, when he's talking about Pietro.
Oh yeah, he's like, I didn't know he was so great with kids.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, it's like, so he really nailed all of that stuff here. So I really got the vibe of who he was channeling there, and I thought that was amazing.
Yeah, I really like this opening scene because, like last week, well, the previous episodes prior to last week, it was like, we're going to drop hints of surrealism here and there, and it's mainly towards the end of the episode. But last week, and now with this week, from the opening scene, they're throwing you into this weird surrealism little things where it's with Pietro when they're talking about, which I found funny as well, they're talking about past Halloweens they've had when they were kids, and you got the Sokovian Halloween where the old lady drops the fish.
Yeah. And that was so Malcolm in the Middle, is that kind of, it's not even the cutaway gag, it's the fact that it's so bold and it's got that music behind it. They really did well at replicating that.
And then it's when Wanda points out, she's like, oh, I think we remember that a bit differently. And then this is the key line here. Pietro says, your brother suppressed a lot of the trauma. And he's referring to her brother in the third person, not the first person. So I found that interesting, that line.
But also, the intro introduces everyone as Wanda Maximoff, Billy Maximoff, Vision. But then Pietro Maximoff as himself. I don't know why. I just found that interesting.
Yeah,
I'm going to leave that there for a bit, just until I get to my theory later on. But it could just be because he's the cameo character and he's the uncle who's dropped in. But it's quite interesting.
It is also a classic sitcom trope of maybe bringing a celebrity into the show, and they always say it's whoever as himself or herself.
Yeah.
So it could also be a note to that. But I do agree with you. I think there's more to it than that. There is definitely more to it there. I mean, going back to Evan Peters, I really think he delivers a powerhouse performance in this episode because he fits in perfectly with that Malcolm in the Middle formula where he's the older brother. Do you know what I mean? Of that. But in this case, he's playing the uncle. Because he's being that annoying, troublesome uncle, that gets the kids riled up, creates tension with like the parents and stuff like that. But he's also showing this empathetic display of love for Wanda, which again, it just shows how good of an actor he really is, and how all the acting has been done in this series. Because again, I have to give props to Matt Shakman, the director, because he's getting really the best out of everyone in this show. And I also felt that it could have easily, his performance, it could have easily fallen back and just become like a comedic thing. But the fact that they gave him weight, some really like hefty dialogue towards the end of the episode as well, not hefty, but some nuanced dialogue to say. So I think it's a good sign that they're really doing well over here with the acting. And
really with the comedic stuff as well, like the fact that he's just like, he's like, Billy told me to do it. He's just like, I'm Tommy. He's just like, don't you ever forget it.
Yeah.
It's just that the comedic timing he's got, and like the way that he's like being over the top and so kooky, but like in a restrained way. He's balancing it really well. And I think the credit as well with the kids and stuff, there seems to be like a chemistry with them. And like you said, it's interesting that Evan Peters is like mirroring Francis from Malcolm in the Middle. And even Tommy, the kid who plays him, almost looks like Dewey in some ways.
Yeah.
And then Billy is, almost then like Malcolm. So I was like, it's too bad that Agnes didn't have a child or something then who could just be Reese or something. I was like, why couldn't they just find another child to be Reese?
Well, it's funny you mentioned a child because there's children everywhere in this episode. After the last 5, there was not a single one to be seen.
I really wanted Vision to wake up and just look out the window and be like, really, really, Wanda?
Really? Now there's children in the park.
Yeah.
We'll get into that. But before we get into that, we head back to the Sword People. So this is where Jimmy, Darcy, and Monica, they're having some action. This is basically where it's, as you said, Dave, it's pretty much right after Wanda comes out of the hex. And Hayward's like, she's a villain. We need to do this. Monica's straight to the defense of Wanda, being like, can't just go in there all guns blazing, your missile ruined the mission, blah, blah, blah. And he's like, oh, you're defending the superheroes. I know your relationship with Captain Marvel and stuff like that. But it was from this scene where I was like, Hayward, you're a dick. He's just being an absolute arsehole here. It's especially when he called out Monica right at the end. I was like, oh, no, you did not just speak to Monica Rambeau like that. Like, how dare you? So then, they get escorted off the premises, but then they do some action and kick those guards' butts. So what's going on with Hayward here? Because this guy, said it from the moment I saw this guy. It's bad news.
You know what? I kind of just want him just to be, he is just a dick and like an original character. I don't think there needs to be even I don't even think it would make that much sense. I know Tom is saying about like him being a Skrull and stuff like that. I don't even think that would make much sense because the Skrulls are meant to be sort of helping us at this stage, what we think. Obviously, we'll see what happens in Secret Invasion and Captain Marvel 2. But I do have a bit of a problem with this idea of SWORD being another evil corporation because we've had that with SHIELD, and it's like, oh, okay, cool, SWORD, intergalactic, and obviously they're going to be of wider thinking because they might work more in space, etc. But then just to boil it back down to just, they're just a bunch of like angry dudes who want to restrict the soups and everything. It might have been best if they did that with a character like General Ross. So somebody like that. So somebody who come in like from the government or something, or somebody who just worked for the FBI like Jimmy Woo does, because let's not forget that Jimmy Woo works for the FBI, not for SWORD. So I think that it would have been interesting if they had done something like that. I don't like the idea that it's just like, oh, SWORD's evil. And it's like, do we really need to go down this route again? Especially with the fact that Captain Marvel made the intentional choice to be like, oh, the Skrulls actually aren't the villains in this story. And I can buy into that in Secret Invasion and Captain Marvel 2, that there'll maybe be this faction who have been like, no, we shouldn't be going down this road, or that kind of thing. But I don't think it should be at the sacrifice of another corporation, because we've already lost, like SWORD. Do we really then want the immediate replacement to then also be the exact same narrative after it? So, yeah, I just would prefer him just to be just a dick, a guy who, like he said, he lived through the last 5 years, which Monica hasn't, which I think was like, a fair point. But obviously then the comment he made about her mum, like, whoa.
Ooh, yeah.
Like, I literally audibly said, like, whoa, man, like, that was not cool. And I'm surprised she didn't say more to that, because that was, like, really uncool to say. So, yeah.
Shout out to Tiona Paris as acting again, because it's all in her face.
I was going to say.
It's all in her face.
Yeah. So I would be more on board with him just being an original character who is just a dick, and we just see the end of him by the end of this series. And that, yeah, obviously there maybe seems to be more going on in that he wants Vision, or he was experimenting with Vision, etc. But it doesn't have to be a part of some mad, grander scale thing.
No, I was just going to say that I also think with 3 episodes to go, I don't know, I said this to Tom last week, like, at this point in the show, you might be expecting a bit too much of the audience to have all these villain reveals, like Agnes, Mephisto, and then Hayward, Skrulls. Yeah. I think at this point in the show, it's a little too late for that. So, yeah, I'm with you. I think this guy's just a dick. I'm hoping SWORD's not a dick. I'm hoping he's just a bad egg. Do you know what I mean? And, like, because, like you, I wouldn't want to see another governmental thing. Oh, it was corrupt from within, so we have to tear it down sort of thing. I'm like, well, we've just been introduced to SWORD, really. We haven't really spent that much time with them. So if you were going to do that, build up to it like you did with SHIELD, but not in the first sort of really encounter we have with them, apart from like a post-credit scene. So, and the Skrull thing, I'm not entirely, I don't want to dismiss that theory just yet, because while I agree with you, so far what we've been set up is that the Skrulls are on the good guy, the part of the good guys. However, that was in the 90s. So, So, significant time has passed, over, I would say 30 years at this point, in story that is. So things would have changed, things would have happened, so I'm not pulling the trigger yet on the Skrull theory, but I just think he might just be a dick.
I agree with you. I don't think that, again, like, obviously we will get the villainous aspects of the Skrulls. Yeah, I just don't think it should be at the sacrifice of the entirety of SWORD. You don't want to see the entirety of SWORD villainized, because then you've got all these villainous Skrulls in it. But there definitely will be an element of the Skrulls have changed since the 90s, and there'll be a faction or a big part of them that want revenge or whatever. But I do want to shout out from this scene, like you said, Tiona Paris, because she is quickly becoming one of my favorite characters in the MCU. And Tiona Paris as an actress is absolutely killing it. I think that she is so good. Like, when she was cast, I was like, okay, because you just think the character that's already been played, they might just be there as a, like, fun, like, oh, hey, we're going to have this character here. And it's maybe kind of like, obviously, like, Don Cheadle is great as War Machine, but it might kind of just be that character who's just there to usually support and add humor to the main character. But no, she she has like a lot of her own like beliefs and strengths and emotion and logic as a character. She is so smart. And my favorite line, one of my favorite lines of this episode, and this is when I love, like, when the MCU brings out corkers like this, you know, the kind of like Wanda with the whole, like, you know, I can't control their fear, only my own. And some people might say that this is like, well, why is that such a good line? But it just shows her character so much of Monica Rambeau. When she responds to Hayward by saying, if Wanda is the problem, she has to be our solution. I was like, yes. I was like, that's so good, because it shows how clever Monica is. And I was like, yeah, that makes complete sense. But it's not one of those things where you're like, oh, well, yeah, that's obvious. Because you can understand in some ways what Sword are doing. But I just love the logic behind that. And I love Monica's passion to reach out to Wanda, because she understands the grief and the pain she's going through, because she's going through it herself, and she's been in the hex, like she said. She was like, you saw me as an ally, and all of that has culminated for me in that line. And I think it shows that she's so clever to say that she's just like, if you kill her, you could wipe out our chance of stopping this, which I think is just perfect. I thought it was such a good dynamic to have in the tension, because sometimes scenes like this can just be like, you completely support the good guy, and then the bad guy just makes complete no sense. You're like, what? That argument makes no sense whatsoever. But I think both of them have got great points, but what she says like hits the nail on the head.
Yeah, to add to that as well, it's a couple of scenes later, but when she's talking to Jimmy and Darcy, she's like, I know what Wanda's going through. Like and it's like, oh yes, like of course you do. Like, this is why your character's here. Like, and it's just so good. It's just really good writing, I think.
Wanda is the problem. She has to be our solution.
Captain Rambeau, you have become an impediment to this mission. Constantly advocating on behalf of superpowered individuals. Yes, I know your history with Carol Danvers.
So yeah, we're going to go back to the Halloween celebrations. So this is where we get, a bit of a fun scene here. We got Wanda, Pietro, and the kids all, trick-or-treating, and Pietro's zipping around everywhere with the kids and spraying silly string on everyone and smashing up pumpkins and doing all of that. But before that, this is where Wanda starts to test Pietro, because she's asking him a question. Do you remember whatever the question was? And he's like, I know what you're doing. You're trying to test me. And I'm just like, so is he aware of... Well, he clearly is aware of what Wanda's doing here. He's maybe not aware how she's doing it, because he asked that question. But it seems like he knows everything. He knows everything going on that Wanda's doing, what's going through her head, knows that Vision is dead, all these things. And it's just weird. But then we go to this next weird scene, which is when Wanda is talking to Herb. She's asking him, is Vision about and stuff? He's like, oh, he's not on duty. Wanda clicks on that Vision's up to maybe something. But it's when I just find it funny that Herb goes, is there anything I can do for you, Wanda? Is there something I can change? I was just like, what the hell can you change? A few episodes ago, I thought maybe Herb is in on this, knows a couple of things. And then I thought, no, he's not, because there was an episode where he was looking all David Lynchian and cutting through the wall. I thought, okay, he seems a victim as well. But then he says this line, is there anything I can change? What do you make of that? What's going on with Herb?
I think that because he's shown that he has a ID card and everything, I think most of the characters have shown that they're probably not anything to do with it, apart from potentially Agnes. But again, we'll get onto that because, there's a spanners thrown in the works of that later on as well. But I think it comes down to what they've done with like the mailman in the last episode and the doctor. I think that scene was meant as more of them channeling what they're thinking inside, in which she's asking them to play these parts and these roles. So I think it's a part of that, is that they feel that they're performing for Wanda and they're being asked to do these roles. So I think to me that came across as just like, what do you want, Wanda? I don't want to like anger you, because they know that they're being controlled by her. So the same way that like last week the mailman said like, oh, your mother will always get what she wants, or, something like that. So I think that's what this scene came across as me, as of him being like, is everything okay? Mistress, do you want me to change anything? Do you want me, that kind of thing?
Yeah, and it's this is where Wanda's starting to be like, something's not quite right here, because she's obviously noticed Vision's acting funny, now Herb's acting funny, and she's a bit dubious that Pietro seems to know as much as he does. So it's a bit weird. But then we go back to Vision, where he's like walking through the streets of Westview. This is where we get a really weird scene as well, like, because he seems a bit perplexed that all these children are just running around. He's like looking around the place like, what the hell? Where? I literally said last night there's no children, and now there's like thousands of them.
Yeah.
So he's looking all like, he's like, oh, this is weird. And then it's when he walks by this house and just sees two people in this repetitive loop. I felt that was so weird. Even when I was watching, I was like, oh, that's definitely very David Lynchian, like watching this right now.
Yeah.
And then on the lady, you see the single tear stroll down. I was just like, this is weird, man. This is, and Vision's just like, what the hell's this as well? Like, and it's really interesting to point out as well that I think it was Jimmy or Darcy, one of them, pointed out that near the barrier, or the border, I should say, between the real world and the Hex, the houses that are closer to there are still, the people are not moving. What do you think's all that about, and why they were in this repetitive loop that Vision was looking at?
Well, it's like she said in the last episode, isn't it? She was like, do you think I can make everyone go to their dentist appointments and everyone can, go here and walk their dogs? So I think it's an element of that, is that, again, whoever or however all of this is done, whether it's solely through Wanda, there's a limit to that power. So there's going to be an element of then, as you go wider out of the power and the reach, as we see later on, Wanda literally, explodes, a wave of energy and then freezes everyone. I think there's an element of that. Is just as you get further out, you get more people then who are less controlled, because again, they're not in the vicinity of Vision and the children, so it doesn't matter as much. It's kind of like in film and television when the extras off a mile down the road, it doesn't matter what they're doing as much. Whereas if you can see a guy right behind somebody, then he's going to have to be okay, make sure that you're cutting up this stall or this pumpkin and everything. You can see exactly what they're doing because they're really in shot. Whereas somebody miles and miles in the background, they can just be sort of walking around and just doing a bit of casual chit chat because you can't see them that much. So it's kind of like that effect. It's the aspect of then the wider out they are, the less controlled they are, and the more that they're just becoming a part of the scenery, that they're just like there as like mannequins almost, because they're just adding to the atmosphere and the environment rather than actually being able to be controlled, because they're not in near sight of people like Vision and Billy and Tommy, etc. So, but yeah, it was all very, disturbing and heartbreaking as well. To see that tear as well was really heartbreaking, to think, oh my God, like this person inside, literally, like we saw in the last episode where Norm, it's really like traumatizing to sort of see. That is one of my faults with the episode as well, is where you were saying about obviously skipping the 90s is unfortunate. We also do lose a bit of that chemistry with the family unit, because again, we haven't really seen Vision and all of them as a family. I think that if anything's going to happen to the children, we'll definitely buy into Wanda's grief or loss, because she has spent so much time with them. But it's unfortunate that we haven't really seen Vision there. And I think it's also unfortunate that he does kind of go, hey, yeah, I'm just going to go now. And even Wanda herself says, this is our first Halloween with the kids. And even though obviously that would just be incredibly maybe boring or a bit schmaltzy for us to see, but it does seem a bit out of character for Vision to at least not go, yeah, this is our first Halloween. I'll spend some time here, but I'll later wander off. So I think that we lose a bit of dynamic, and this entire episode, Vision's on his own for the entirety of it, which when you get to the end of it then, when they're like, oh my God, Dad's in trouble, it doesn't connect quite as well, because you haven't seen even the kids interact with Vision in that episode. So I think that it does cause for an actual problem with the episode. So I think that they should have had Vision interact a bit more with the Halloween stuff and with the family, and then wander off and do his own thing maybe a bit later on.
I couldn't have said it better myself, Dave. I was going to bring that point up as well, because I was like, because even in the previous episode, it was pretty much just Wanda with the twins. We got Vision with a couple of scenes with them, but not enough for me to them to establish a connection, a relationship, you could say. Because last week's episode was pretty much Vision and Wanda arguing. That was like the main focus. And this one's like Vision goes off on his own. So yeah, I think he should have at the beginning maybe spent some time. Maybe something in the Halloween party triggers him to go, hang on a second. And then like starts to wander off, you know, because I don't know. It seems odd that Wanda hasn't maybe rejigged him, you know, rebooted him in a way to go back to the sitcom, because we opened this episode with him clued on to what's happening. So yeah, it's a bit it's interesting that she hasn't done that. But maybe this ties in with her starting to lose control in a way, that she can't control everyone. So we then go into the ad. Poor guy, all he wanted to do was eat his yogurt. I thought it was such a dark ad.
Yeah, it kind of does fit again with the era and stuff. You did get these weird like animated kids adverts in which you were like, what? You know, in which like dinosaurs would eat people and weird things like that. And it was all that kind of era of like, weird icky goo, eat the icky goo, die of poison, you know, and you're
bizarre,
like, what?
Just the animation
warhead,
of seeing the
blow
kid,
your
like,
head up
turn
and
to a skeleton. I was like, this is a bit disturbing.
Yeah. I have quite an interesting theory on this advert. On the surface level, we've said before that these adverts seem to be telling the story of like Wanda and, you know, hinting at stuff that's happened in her past, etc. So with this, obviously, it's called Yo Magic, and the character is saying about being like hungry and empty. And later on, we see, you know, Wanda says to Pietro, I felt like I had nothing. I was just in this pit of nothingness. And then all of this happened. So I think what we're seeing is the reflection of what happened to Wanda, how she unleashed her magic, how she became, you know, controlled her powers, how she started to use her hex powers, and how she could control people in the way she's doing, and magic things up and just make, like, you know, an animal or chest of drawers appear, etc. I think this is like alluding to that. So the fact that you get this shark that comes in and they say, I'm so hungry, and they're just like you're hungry, and it's just like, I was like you, but then I discovered Yo Magic. So I'm really intrigued now of like, okay, so who is this shark meant to be mirroring? Who is this person who's come in that like, hey, I was also hungry, I was also empty until I discovered magic, you know, and this is get rid of the yo in that situation, which I think is really interesting, that then they've made them discover that. Like I said, a bit weird that then that like cartoon character dies, but again, that could come down to the fact that, you know, maybe it's Wanda or somebody, you know, trying to restrain themselves and not get too dive too deep into it. But I think the shark was really interesting, the fact that he said, you know, like, oh, I was starving too, I was really hungry as well. So on the surface level, I think it's something like that. It could easily then be Mephisto, Agnes, or something like that. Manipulation,
basically, because maybe the shark was never hungry.
Yeah.
And they're just saying that it you know, goes back to the tale of Adam and Eve and the snake, you know, offering the apple to them. It's like, ooh, you know, take this, you know, when they actually, they know they've got bad intentions behind their decisions. So, yeah, it's a good theory. I like that one. The next scene after the ad is pretty much them coming out of, you know, not coming out of, but walking by the cinema. And this was already a couple of hints that signified for me that this was the noughties. I was like, it's showing The Incredibles, which was 2004, and Parent Trap, which are very early noughties films. So, and then we get into like Pietro talking about, this is where he gets really meta and almost fourth wall, because he's like, I've got the line here. He's like, I've come to town unexpectedly, create tension with the brother-in-law, stir up trouble with the Rugrats, and ultimately give you grief. I mean, that's what you wanted, isn't it? And then he goes on to say that he was doing his thing when he heard Wanda calling. So I've got a couple of theories here. Can Wanda call people from literally across multiverses and be able to pull or communicate with people across multiverses? And that's how maybe he came into the fold, that it is actually Peter from those Fox X-Men films.
I don't think it is Peter from those films. I think this episode proved that, though, because like he says about his child, you know, when he says like, I remember trick or treating. So like, because they're all like Sokovian based, I don't think it is like that Peter at all.
Because he questions the accent, and then she questions his accent.
Yeah, but he also says, like, when I died like a chump on the street and all that kind of stuff. That's what again made me think that, you know, it suggests that this is the character who, you know, or in some ways they're pulling from that character who died. But that's why I think it's somebody else, because, you know, again, why would that character say like, I died like a chump? It seems like quite a harsh thing for them to say about themselves. And again, it's a very, you know, we saw that Aaron Taylor Johnson's character was he had some good morals and everything, whereas this guy is like an ass, because at the end, you know, Wanda blasts him into like a bale of hay because she's like, shut the hell up. But I don't think Aaron Taylor Johnson Quicksilver would ever say something like that. It seems like a really horrible thing to say. And again, I don't think the Peter from Days of Future Past would have said that. So that's why I think that, but coupled with the memory side of things, that's why I think it's somebody else maybe posing as Quicksilver, and maybe they have just got the face wrong. Maybe that's why the face is wrong. They're like, oh, I've messed up, you know, or something like that. Or like I said, maybe because they are, you know, somebody like Mephisto, they're pulling from the multiverse or something like that. And that's as close as they could get, or whatever.
No one leaves. Wanda won't even let us think about it.
All is lost.
Agnes. Agnes, please, calm down. Agnes. I will fix this, Agnes, I promise.
Yeah, at this stage in the episode, we go back to Sword, where the three amigos, they find out that Hayward is tracking Vision's vibranium, which is like, well, of course, Hayward's a bad guy, you know, but then we get it back to Vision. This is where I was losing my shit with this scene. It's when Vision talks to Agnes. When Agnes is just parked there on the frontier in her car, like all staring into nothingness. Vision sort of unplugs her from Wanda's control, let's say. She then freaks out seeing Vision, and you know, and this is where it's really interesting, because Vision seems to have no memory that he's an Avenger. He knows he's Vision. He knows he wants to save people, what's an Avenger? And then it was crazy because then Agnes did No One Leaves. Wanda won't even let us think about it. All is lost. Now, this scene at the beginning, they were setting it up to basically disprove everyone's theories that maybe Agnes is another victim, just another. But I'm just like, you're not fooling me that easy. Because then you wouldn't have her just have this maniacal laugh at the end. Do you know what I mean?
No,
and
exactly, yeah.
She's wearing a witch's outfit, and that laugh is a very traditional cackling witch type of laugh, isn't it?
No, a normal person doesn't laugh like that, even if you are being mind
exactly.
controlled.
So I was like, oh, okay, maybe. No, she is still. I'm still like, she's definitely involved somehow. But yeah, this was actually one of my favorite scenes of the whole episode. Just the tension, the sense of dread, the sense of disturbingness and surrealism. I was like, ew, it's creepy. I love it. Like,
yeah, because Catherine Hahn and Paul Bettany are both so good, and that moment where she's like
dead,
and I was just like, it's really scary. I was like, oh my god, it reminds me of, again, when you have those films when you're in like a mental asylum and somebody's like repeating something and the character's kind of freaked out. It's like one of those moments where you're like, oh my god. But yeah, I'm with you. I think that we've seen that Agnes doesn't have an ID card on her on the board. So, you know, I think that she's either just playing along, or maybe she's just got a bit over encompassed by the entire situation. We'll have to see.
Maybe, but the thing is, when you say that line, you know, all is lost, and then break out into a laughter,
yeah,
it just seems like, because the way it was shot as well is that it turns into like a smile first, and I was just like, oh, she's happy this is happening. I genuinely think she's playing along with Vision rather than Wanda.
And because Vision, even though he puts his hand on her and she triggers, there's nothing to say that Vision has actually done anything there. She might have just been playing along. She might be saying, you're an Avenger. She might just be like doing an act at that point, which I think is also interesting. But we'll have to see. I think definitely Agnes is one. Is just we'll have to see because there's so many red herrings in terms of her character.
Yeah, I think our theories about Dottie, I think they're out the window now, just because we haven't seen her basically since the first time, and that one short scene with "Oh, thank God."
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I'm kind of gunning on a reveal of Quicksilver and Agnes of kind of coming out of the shadows and seeing who they are, kind of thing.
Yeah. So back to the three Omegos in Sword. This is where, again, Monica mentioning her aerospace engineer. Looks like we're going to meet this guy because they were on the way to meeting him because she's going to get some sort of suit so she can go back into the Hex. Darcy's looking up, hacking into the computer. This is where she finds out Monica's blood tests, that they've been affected, that her molecular structure is changing from passing the Hex twice now. Mm-hmm. And I was just like, well, there you go. That's how she gets her powers. That's how she eventually becomes Photon, which is interesting. But again, as I said in the last episode when I was chatting to Tom, I do hope they don't just go straight into that.
Yeah.
Like, I do kind of hope they maybe save that for another appearance of Monica in the Captain Marvel sequel, for example. I don't want them to go for her getting her powers in this show because I think it's too soon. And as you said, I'm just loving Monica Rambeau as she is, powers or no powers. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see where they go from there.
I think they could end it with just her going into space or something with the powers because we've seen, like I said, she has some sort of like beef with Carol or something like that. She's like, well, now I've got these powers, I'm going to go find Carol. I think they could do something like that, just an end shot, an end credit scene of her just flying off. But yeah, I agree with you. I don't want to see her like fully embrace it straight away. And I would assume they won't because the MCU has that history of being like, oh, we'll show Quicksilver and Wanda in this end credit scene, showing their powers, then have them in Age of Ultron. They don't sort of just bring them in straight away kind of thing.
Yeah. So let's see where that goes. But that's definitely another cool addition. We then go back to the Halloween where, just like we saw in episode 4 with Wanda seeing dead Vision, she sees a dead Pietro, which is interesting. Again, that another little thing to show that she's completely losing it here.
And another clever reference throughout the episode is that he keeps spooking her and going like boo and like the scary faces. So then that was a good build up to that moment as well, which I thought was quite clever. Though, like I said to Tom in our chat, I don't believe that she's dug up Quicksilver. I think that he would look a lot more decayed than that if that was his dead body.
Yeah, so then we get to the climax of the episode. This was awesome. So Vision gets to the barrier of the Hex, starts to climb through it. Clearly Hayward is planning something with the Vision, but we still don't really know what that is because he's all like, get to Vision. They're tracking his vibranium. So even though he's after Wanda in a way and she's a threat, I think his priority is Vision more than Wanda for some strange reason, which we'll find out, I'm sure. But this, when Vision's coming out of the force field and all that stuff is like, his pieces are basically disintegrating. This was another really good performance from Bettany. It showed another side to him. It was a very tragic hero moment. Do you know what I mean? Where he's just like, Darcy comes out, she's like, you have to save him. And he's like, save the people, all this.
I know.
Really emotional. And I just felt really sad for Vision. I was just like, no, Vision, like, poor guy. But then it doesn't end there. I should have mentioned this earlier, that the twins somehow have got their powers now.
Yeah, we see Tommy speeding around.
Speeding around, and then Billy has magic powers now. But he's also got this telekinesis. He somehow manages to feel that Vision's in trouble. And this is where Wanda's like, what? Shoom! Does the whole thing with her hands, stops everybody, and then we get into this amazing sequence where the Hex is expanding. And as it expands, it's going through the sword base, turning it into a carnival and clowns and stuff like that, which is really cool. And then we got Darcy's in the sitcom world now because she got swallowed up by that. But what did you make of this whole last sequence? I thought it was just incredible, man. And then how they ended it, I was just like, you can't end it like that, Disney. I saw so many tweets with the picture of the please stand by, the first thing you see with the credits roll. And I saw people go like, this is the true villain of WandaVision.
That is credits. True. Yeah, we're just going to find out that Nightmare, whoever, is just there at a TV editing station at the end episode. Yeah, I absolutely love this because it just, again, it's my kind of jam. It's the kind of just, let's go batshit crazy. Hey, do you know what would be fun? Let's turn all these sword agents into people at a carnival. Why? We don't know, but it's bloody brilliant. I absolutely loved it and I've watched it now about 3 times because it's just so chaotic. And I can't think of many other things in which you've had this because, again, even like in a film, you never have this far out a kooky idea. Yeah, you've had people running away from barriers and storms. We've seen that plenty of times before, but they just disintegrate or, blow away or something. But just to be turned into clowns. And I love the guy who they change because they're running away and then alter. And then immediately they're as clowns, miming and stuff. But that guy who just turned into the roll up. I just love that somebody was there 1 minute running away. And then immediately he's roll up, come and see the carnival. I just found that funny.
Yeah. And the searchlights turning into flagpoles and stuff.
Yeah, all of that. That was a great intro to that. And again, credit to Matt Shankman for easing us into that, is that showing the gradual. If you just saw somebody immediately become a clown, you would have been like, what? Where's the flags, then the buildings. It was a good progression. And it just all looked gorgeous as well. The helicopter turned into that balloon. I was like, I want to be at that carnival. Yeah. It looked so nice. But so I'm interested in Wanda's reasoning there. Obviously, it's easily the carnival's come to town. I think that's kind of the assumption. But because it is so 60s, 50s looking, I wonder if there's an element of that there, or whether it is just this is an old-timey carnival. Because when we see the car garage, that kind of looks like a 90s, 2000s sort of car garage.
Yeah.
But like you, I have to go back to that Vision moment. It was, I literally was screaring at the TV at this moment. I was calling Hayward all the names under the sun by here. I was just
you dick!
Yeah, I was just man, just... I think of all the characters in the MCU, Vision has actually suffered one of the most, actually. He's gone through some bad shit. He's the product of one of the biggest villains they've had. He's died twice. He was severely injured at the start of Infinity War. And now here, he's literally being teared apart. But yet his gut instinct is still the people. And just thinking about it makes me want to cry. It's just that idea of being he's dying and then he's just the people need help. And I'm just it's so sad. The fact he's willing to sacrifice his life just to tell them, please help these people. But he doesn't think about himself in that situation. That shows what a different character he is. And you guys were talking about it last week about the morals of Vision, about saying that there's times in the comics where he said to, Wanda, that's not cool. You don't do that. And I think that this is one of those moments that really defines the difference with Vision as a character. And as Jimmy has said, his will, he didn't want to become a weapon and all that kind of stuff. This all fits in with that. So it was really heartbreaking. And yeah, really cruel that we ended things at that moment. And while I'm not, one of those who's just I need the episode right now, I want to binge it.
Oh, no, I'm happy to wait.
Oh, yeah, exactly. But I do, it was a bit on the nose to literally be halfway through. It would have been nice just to see something a bit more, I think. Just more in terms of the length of the episode, and because we hadn't had those connections with Vision and Billy, etc., like we said earlier, that's why I would have felt it would have been nice just to see them go into Vision at the end, just so we at least could have got some resolution as to the Billy, Tommy, Vision stuff here. But again, you can't deny that it's an awesome cliffhanger and it is pretty epic. So I will give them that. But yeah, be interesting to see where they pick up on the next episode after this. Will it just literally be the next morning, the next era of sitcoms, Vision's in bed or something like that?
Yeah, because, wow, if they did that, that's a bold move, I think. Because Vision's still lying in the ground, out there, in his normal Vision attire. Hayward and stuff, we don't know what's happened with them. We don't really know what's happening with Monica and Jimmy. Darcy got sucked in, so is she just going to appear as like a sitcom character. It's which is going to be great. That brings us to the end of the episode. Was there anything else that you wanted to bring up? I think a couple of little things. I know you'll appreciate this, and that is the Kick-Ass reference.
Yeah, that was great. Like when it happened, I was like, did they just do that? I was like, what? I was like, oh my God. I had to rewind that bit. I was like, that's amazing. Because when he said, oh yeah, Kick-Ass, I was like, oh, that's a fun coincidence. But then when she went, Kick-Ass, and I was just like, you don't say that again for no reason.
Yeah, you don't say it twice, yeah. I'm not like a speculation, and then when it comes true, I'm like, yes! But there is a bit of pride in me where I was like, I hope they have, the Quicksilver classic costume in a Halloween, and they did, and they even did the hair, and I was like, yeah boy! That's what I wanted.
And obviously, shout out to, Tom said, the Wiccan look for Billy was great as well. As soon as I saw that, I was like, oh my God, Wiccan. So that was really fun. And yeah, then eventually we got Tommy then dressed up as Quicksilver, which is fun. But I do hope that they differentiate the character. He can't just be Quicksilver point 2, because I think from what I've seen, that's been the character's problem in the comics, is the Wiccan is the cooler of the twins because he's more of an individual character.
Yeah, because Speed's just another Quicksilver, basically. Yeah.
Exactly. So hopefully they can do a bit more to sort of individualize him as a character. But yeah, I think that from what we've seen, though, just based on what you were saying about being surprised about the next episode if they don't pick things up, well, we've already seen from the start of this episode, the sword stuff picked up immediately after that interaction with Wanda. So we probably will pick that up straight away. But the sitcom stuff usually starts a new day, etc. So I think that's what will happen, is that we'll start this new sitcom.
Because we're on the monitors in the Sword headquarters, there is a slight delay to what they're watching to what we're watching, isn't there?
Yeah, exactly. Which you kind of need. And I think... But they showed us enough to not really need the resolution on the sitcom side of things. Obviously, you couldn't do a time jump on the Sword stuff. That would just be crazy. But we know the Vision's safe. We know that the family's going to go find him. We know that Pietro's in trouble, or is like she's not happy with him. But I think we'll see most of the side effects of that afterwards. And I think from what we've seen with the promo material, they seem to be going with Modern Family.
I was going to say, we getting Modern Family next week?
Yeah, and I think that would make sense, because if, again, that's very much kind of talk to camera, documentary style. That might make a lot of sense if Vision is very disenfranchised by what happens, and even maybe Pietro, or she's angry with him, because I think the clip I've seen is where Wanda's kind of saying like, yeah, I'm not feeling too good, or something like that. So she might be very much like on her own at this stage, or just her and the kids. We'll have to see what happens.
Yeah, man, I can't wait for next week. It's going to be a ride. 3 episodes to go, and there's still so many questions to be answered. So I'm hoping for these last 3 episodes to really, ump it up huge. I'm expecting, maybe not next week, because I do expect a more sitcom-y approach to the next episode. But for the last 2 episodes, I shouldn't have high expectations, but my expectations are high that it's going to be a big spectacle, the last 2.
Yeah. And I think that, I kind of was surprised the Vision. I expected Vision to get through and just actually then be interacting with that world and maybe go back in. Interestingly, the IMDb for the next episode has got that sort of shot we've seen from the trailers where she's looking at the Mind Stone. And you said earlier actually about what is Hayward after. Well, let's not forget that the Mind Stone is maybe somewhat, at least in terms of we can see it's back when she's brought back Vision. But obviously, if it's just his corpse, then it's dug out of his head.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because they were destroyed. So
yeah, but let's not forget.
I should say they were destroyed by Thanos, and then Cap put the other ones back. Yeah.
But Vision still was an entity that was linked to an Infinity Stone. His body, his circuitry was all linked to that. So that might be a lot of the reason why Hayward is interested in him, because at the end of the day, it's still a body that's got probably a lot of energy and information and data linked to the Infinity Stone that they could use, because like they did with Hydra, you know, all they had to do was just like plug into this like stone and they could like absorb and use some of his powers. So again, Vision's body might withhold a lot of that same energy and information and stuff like that. So I think that's interesting. And especially that stuff is, I have no idea where that's going, is what we've seen in the trailer of Wanda seeing the stone and being like blasted away by it, etc.
Because in Infinity War, you know, they make an effort in that movie to, because I think it's mentioned that there still could be a lot of Vision left without the stone.
Yeah, exactly.
So there's I don't know, I could be pulling this as well, but maybe there's an element of that Wanda has somehow resurrected the little bit that was left in the corpse or something. Like maybe
we never knew how much Shuri completed her
exactly
mission. She kind of just was doing it, and then the Corvus Glaive rocked up, and she had just like closed the program. But we don't know how much of that she like completed as well. So
big things to be answered, man, and only 3 episodes left. I can't wait. Been loving this show so far, and yeah. So let's get out of here then, as we usually do. Dave, who is writing this week's episode on Fresh Take?
Yeah, you can catch Stefanos will be writing this week's episode review. So he'll be doing episode 6 and then following up with 7. So you can catch that on freshtakehub.com. So go check that out right now.
Yeah, and you're doing the last 2, aren't you?
I get the joy of talking about the finale. I treated myself to that. My review will just be like, there was no Mordo, how dare they?
Unlike the Mandalorian, where you got lugged with the spider episode.
Yeah, exactly. Frog lady and
Frog lady and spiders.
Joy. Yeah.
What about yourself, man? Where can the people find you and what you're getting up to at the minute?
You can catch me also on freshtakehub.com. You can catch me on Letterboxd, where you can see what I'm watching at the moment and where I drop reviews. And you can also catch me on Twitter at David Oscar. So that's David and then OSGAR.
Awesome stuff. Yeah, pretty much on the same places. You can catch me on Twitter at Sweaty Jake, and you can also catch me in my films watching on Letterboxd at Jake Hart. But for the show, again, thank you for listening to our weekly review episodes of WandaVision. We've been having a blast doing them, and we hope you've been enjoying them. You can find us on Anchor, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google, wherever you get your podcasts from. We're on all of it. And then on socials, we're also on Twitter and Facebook at Capes, Cows, and Mass. So if you want to keep the conversation going, tweet at us, message us, and we'll see. Let's keep the conversation going. Get some more speculation out there. And if you have friends as well that are like, dude, what the hell's going on in WandaVision? You know what? Recommend us, because they might have a better understanding what's going on in Westview. So we'll see you next week then. Same WandaVision time, same WandaVision channel. Once again, thanks for listening. Stay safe and take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.